Today is the second day of this Anubhav event, and we are into a very interesting panel discussion on, I would say, holistic education. We've tried to, in a sense, simplify it, saying what role does art play, and in the manner of very smart people, we love these acronyms. So this is a panel about from STEM to STEAM, and I have to tell you that talking to Dr. Aatre before this panel, he said, I hope we generate enough steam. So with that, welcome to the speakers, and we hope Nuriya will join us. She's held up in the Bangalore traffic. Bombay traffic. I'm so used to the Bangalore traffic, sorry, that was Freudian, absolutely. So, in the interest of time and to make the most of the presence of our speakers, we are just doing a small, we have a set of questions which we sent around, and we are doing this in a kind of format of a few questions to which each of the panelists will give their ideas and inputs. So the very first one is, if Dr. Aatre will start, and we go this way, maybe reverse for the second one. Do you feel that art naturally integrates into STEM learning for children? Why or why not?
It doesn't naturally fit. But if you look at how to teach, there are a number of methods of teaching. One of the methods of teaching is, as we have seen, rote and so on. There have been experiments outside India, especially in UK. Manchester University has tried whether dance and drama is a more powerful method to teach science. In fact, they have gone away and tried to do Einstein theory of relativity through dance and teach it to the students. The question is, you must improvise, you will innovate on that. Anything which they can perform, play acting, and other things kind of things help. Science and technology is, to some extent, is mundane. A lot of people try to think there is no creativity in science. It is not true if you look around what it is. But the creativity and innovation is much more so in art section. Somehow you can bring in that. One piece of information which most of you may not know, but I'm sure Revathi knows. In American universities, if you do a PhD, you've got to take courses from other faculty. Whereas in India, there is a rush towards forming engineering faculty, medical faculty separated, destroying the structure of the overall university where arts plays a very important role. One last point before I pass on to others. We keep hearing about science technology, how important it is in society. Now there is a new course which is being introduced, Science, Technology and Society. And this course is almost in liberal arts area, not in the science and technology area. So we have just started learning how to introduce science through liberal arts, especially drama, dance, storytelling and this kind of thing. That is the way to go, but we have nowhere achieved kind of things yet.
Hi, and thank you for inviting me here in this rather stellar company. I was thinking about the questions that were sent to me a couple of days ago, and one of the things that I remember a visit to the Copan campus of Agastya International Foundation and seeing the Innovation Center in Arts and Media Arts building. And I remember being with Mr. Ajit Basu, Subbu was with me as well, and all of us thinking, and I was told the story of how they had insisted that arts would be a part of their endeavor, and it would not just be STEM education. And all of us sort of collectively shouted, STEAM education. And since that time, which is now a couple of years ago at least, I have been actually disturbed by this idea of converting STEM to STEAM. I have been disturbed by the questions that I was sent to come and talk about in this panel, because it seems to me as if we are trying to fit arts in a world that functions with a sort of theocracy of science. I should state here right now that I love science. I am charmed by it. I it allows me to understand the world better. I absolutely love it. And as I was thinking about this, I was reminded of this film called Interstellar. Many of you may have seen it. It came out in 2014, 3 years ago. And Kip Thorpe was one of the scientists who was a consultant for that movie. For those of you who don't know what it was about, the story is located in kind of a dystopian future where we have lost control of being able to remain alive on this planet. And the idea is to make an interstellar journey to find other places in outer space that could be inhabitable and can then be colonized by humankind. Okay? And so the idea is, if you're talking about interstellar distances, the amount of time that it takes to go across and so on, you're looking for wormholes that are tears in the universe that allow you to transcend the idea of really long time. And the idea of wormholes itself is not a scientific idea, it is an imaginary notion at this point in time, although it's opposite, the idea of black holes, for instance, we understand a little bit better. And this film was going to represent both black holes and wormholes and all kinds of things like that, and they wanted to do it as close to the mathematical understanding of it as was possible. And so this scientist was on board, and he was offering them like reams of scientific papers almost, mathematical equations that had to be plugged into computer graphic renderings in order to create as realistic an understanding of a black hole as possible. Now mostly, and Paul Franklin and Eugenie von Tunzelmann, this man and woman duo of computer graphics experts, were working with him on it. And they had created this idea of a black hole that they had rendered on screen. It's 800 terabytes of information that they were putting together, right? And they thought, how do you explain it? It appears like a disc on screen. It's not really giving people a sense of its possible spherical nature. And they thought, well, let's see if we can form, and people who are interested in cosmology, I'm a layperson who looks at this and tries to understand it only through popular science writings. They thought, let's try and see if we can render an accretion disk around it, and whether that might help people see the spherical nature of a black hole. When the scientists sent them the mathematical equations for an accretion disk, and when they rendered it in computer graphics, they found that the horizon properties of a black hole actually warp the accretion disk as well. So even though they imagined that the accretion disk, which is basically the cumulative matter that gets trapped around a black hole, it, instead of being rings of Saturn-like, which is how most scientists had imagined it too, they realized that once they rendered it, it actually forms a halo around the black hole. That's on the sides, it's on the front. And when Kip Thorpe saw it, he had an aha moment. He looked at it and said, damn, that's how it will look. At the end of the movie, not only is he satisfied that the layperson will have as scientifically and mathematically accurate a representation of black holes and accretion disks as is currently possible, he also gets 2 publishable papers out of it. Is that art? Is that science? One of the problems I think that we have is that we think of these disciplines that we've created in order to tabulate our ability as being distinct from one another. I'd like to move away from the argument of STEM and STEAM. I'd like to suggest that technology is tool making. Let's not give it central place. Can we go from STEM or STEAM to mass education? And if you love acronyms, then that's math, art, science, society. Can we do that instead?
I never studied science, so but I make things which I take from a lot of students' experiments that of electricity and magnetism. Also, I learned a lot from the people who work, like the carpenters, the drill makers, the electrician, and also from hobby. Those people who have a hobby electronics. And my works are, I don't know, a lot of people, it is in between science and art. Okay, I work as an artist, but I use all these mechanical parts I make as if even the form comes out of this mechanical process. But we all love art, but we always say that not my son. Okay, so once when I was sketching on the side of the road, a father and son comes. The son said, "Oh, he's drawing." Father said, "Look, if you don't study, this will happen to you." But also, when I was in New York, somebody was saying that police academy there, you have to take up arts and poetry. I don't think it is just because they don't do art, the police don't do art, but it is, I think it creates a kind of sensitivity in the person, and that is more important because the police job is quite harsh job, you do that well, but I think that creates a sensitivity about things. And also I think a lot of magazines are there, science magazines, the magazines science itself illustrate the whole thing with illustration from art, not from anything else. Also, students, I have seen students abroad, they have kids, like younger than them, come to see the museum. I think that it is, I don't know whether you can teach science through art, but in our college I teach a subject called building technology, which is not construction. I can't teach construction. So I make things with them, quite large structures like war machine or drawing machine, and then the engineers take it up for analysis of how well it is functioning, where it is failing, what is the weakness of that. So that can be a way. I do it. I've done it for the last 20 years.
Revathi, may I add a little more? It's really interesting if you find those like black holes and all this. There have been attempts made to teach science in a much simpler way. Very complex things like black holes or instability. There is a scientist called George Gamow. He has written a series of books called Mr. Tompkins, where he puts cartoons to bring out very, very complex things to understand. Like black holes, it can be easily explained. He talks about gravity waves, how to do. But there have been attempts, but we still have not found a very simple artistic method of teaching very complex things. Even very simple things. If somebody asks you, why is 1 + 1 2? You'll find it very difficult to give an interpretation of by technology or whatever it is, except unless I know how to count. So we must innovate on how to teach science by using artistic methods.
Well, Russell wrote Principia Mathematica just to teach 1 + 1 still, isn't it?
So I thought our fourth speaker had arrived, which he hasn't. So I think what I hear, and I think what all of us hear, is that the way we position this as STEM to STEAM is not really working for us. So maybe I will request each of you to talk about, this whole idea of society and how do we bring in the other disciplines for a holistic understanding of science. So, Dr. Aatre?
I would like to give us some little bit of historical procedure. Why did STEM arise? In about 2000, American National Academy of Engineering published a thesis called Grand Challenges. They pointed out 14 areas where humanity is going to face predicaments. Energy, water, too much of nitrogen in the atmosphere, cyber security and all those things. And indicated within the next 50 years the amount of work the technologists and engineers have to do. And they pointed out how inadequately prepared we are to tackle these projects. Yes, technologists who want to solve this problem must look at a number of things. Clearly, problem solving is one such. But as a technologist, he needs a very broad perception. As an engineer, he requires a very in-depth analysis of a subject. Then he has to be able to communicate what it is. Communication is one of the things missing in our science and technology thing. So when you put it all together, then they realized we must run special programs called STEM. That's how the science, technology, engineering and mathematics program came. Within 5 years, somebody wanted to sneak in the A because they found the method of STEM teaching of curriculum in schools, looking at building robotics and others, did not teach enough of them to do the problem solving. So if you want to look at problem solving as a criteria for society, because finally you have to solve society. Science and technology has two phases. One is producing wealth. The second is solving the predicaments of the society. Producing wealth, you don't need arts. But solving the predicaments, you need some kind of you must be able to sell. Like Da Vinci, I gather, knew how to build an airplane. But there was no society which could take it out, and he could not sell it to society, and there were no social energies. So one must look at how we use this. There is no question that if science and engineering technology fails, we won't solve these predicaments. But science and technology alone is not enough to make a personality who will look at the problems of the society. Now in major universities, like we talked about Silicon Valley earlier. Silicon Valley is triggered by Stanford, or Stanford is a design department. And 20 to 30% of the faculty in the design department are not scientists or engineers. Or people who do painting, people who do music, and these kind of things. It's the interplay of the ideas which finally looks at that, and arts as a very important. I'm using art in a very general sense. It could be anything, but that's a very important thing to do.
So if we are looking at art as an umbrella area, which is really design, looking at how it impacts society, then it becomes, I think, far more logical. And would you like to take that up and elaborate on that?
A couple of things. One, I mentioned Kip Thorne earlier, but I didn't tell you who he was. He won the Nobel in physics last year, one of the 3 people, and it was only those 3 people, merely because the Nobel cannot be given to more. The scientists who worked on the discovery of gravitational waves were hundreds of them around the world, including many.
Incidentally, today Kip Thorne is giving a lecture in Bangalore.
All right.
In Vishweshwaraya Society.
We should have been there too. Yes. And our very own Sanjeev Dhurandhar from Alka was a very large part of it. He wrote the mathematical algorithm, a novel algorithm, in order to be able to capture the chirp of the gravitational wave from all the other noise in the universe. C.V. Vishweshwaran, I think, who was an expert on black holes. Yes, he passed away last year. He was another big name, a part of this same experiment, right? And there are hundreds of scientists around the world who did this, and that's just information about that. The last thing that I was speaking of. I agree with everything that you're saying. When you talk about STEM education and why it came about, I'm more interested in finding out where it started from. You mentioned American universities. If you look at the work of a philosopher by the name of Martha Nussbaum, who is an American philosopher who's done a lot of work in India as well, there's this lovely, slim little booklet that's called Not for Profit, Why Democracy Needs the Humanities. Right? And she argues for how perhaps all over the world there is only one really large education system that is left now that gives enough importance and credence to the study of the humanities, and that is the American system. With all its ills and evils, with all the fault that you can find with it, and go ahead and do that. There is no graduate and postgraduate system of education in large countries around the world that favors the humanities and the liberal arts in the way in which American education does. From that matrix, when you say that we want STEM education to also get a certain amount of primacy, it has very different meanings than when it comes to Europe, which is very vocation bound, or places like India, where we start saying 10th standard, okay, are you going to do art, science or commerce after this, right? It's a hugely different matrix within which we are embedding an idea that was generated in a completely different place. That's a huge problem. The reason that I am saying that we should not be separating the science and the arts is this. All of our endeavor is to understand ourselves and the universe around us. It may not even be a universe, it may be a multiverse, but the cosmos, right? This is what we do. We make certain attempts at understanding. When we create a certain way of looking at it, we give it the name of a discipline. It can carry its own jargon so that conversation can happen more quickly inside it. We draw these lines, we say this is painting, this is sculpture, this is physics, this is biology, and then we forget that we created those lines. That you do not become a person unless you have the capacity to enjoy all of this. You certainly have the capacity to understand it. When we speak of the arts and philosophy and science even now, we will say, for instance, that the arts afford us cognitive and evaluative skills, right? A way of reflecting on the world and reflecting the world back on itself. We call it mimesis sometimes. But what we are really saying is that we express what we see and we experience in words, in colors, in plastic forms like sculpture, in melodically arranged sounds. We call that art. Science pushes understanding. It gives us empirical evidence very often, but unless it can take flights of imagination, it doesn't necessarily give us a larger sense of where we are headed. Remove the violin from Albert Einstein's hands. Take away Shakespeare, Milton and Shelley from Darwin, and then find out what kind of men they were. We have no idea. But we never dwell on that. We don't think of what makes their life fuller. What is it that allows them to think about science in the way in which they do? When we talk about society, when I said math, art, science and society, it's one thing to say that you have a scientific background, that you have problem-solving capacity. It's another thing to say, how do you decide which is the problem that needs immediate solving? What helps you decide that except the humanities, except the arts and the liberal arts? Why do we call it a disciplinary boundary rather than saying that this is the fullness of life? Right? When we talk about the arts and the sciences, this is what we say. We say we are trying to cultivate a temper, the scientific temper and the artistic temper. And there is no easy way of saying, here's where it ends. The art ends here, science begins here. Try to ask Einstein, as Alan Lightman has done in this gorgeous little book called Einstein's Dreams, how he thought about the space-time continuum. There was enough physics and mathematics before that for him and anybody else to have done it too. And yet he speaks of dreams. When they talk about benzene rings, Kekule had to speak of dreams. What are we talking about here? Where do you draw the boundary of saying here is scientific education, here is empirical evidence that it's taken us more than 100 years to find empirical evidence for the theories that Einstein put in 2 seminal papers in 1905. How did he come up with those? We really need to rethink the idea of disciplinary teaching, not just making the boundaries fuzzy, but allowing them to be dissolved. And focusing on the fullness of life, which is the reason that we even pursue. B.F. Skinner, a psychologist, said this. He said, education is what is left when everything you have learned has been forgotten.
First thing is I just give the art no more considered, is no more sculpture or painting. That is a wrong, very, that gone long ago. Art now, now sculpture can be even a projection that shows how the whole of this stock exchange centers all over the world working. Okay, one British person made a projection of a dome, which is like, it looks like stars, but actually they are all the functioning of all the stock exchange centers coming and switching off like that. So when when India comes up, there is a light comes up, then it goes off as when the stock exchange closes. So if art is no more sculpture or painting anymore, and most of the serious artists don't do sculpture and painting anymore. So, and also I teach in Architecture College, Kausik with the Institute for Architecture. There we have a lot of humanities faculty, and the issue is that architecture as a profession, if they don't have an ethics with it, you can't work with that. So our presence, like I'm there for full time for last 22 years. Then there are people who are doing pure humanities, they are there. So we want to put the students, even as a faculty we have to have a critical position, and we believe the students should have a critical position too. So that's what we do.
Nuriya is here, so can I please invite you on stage?
Well, actually, I'm here to learn, so I'm completely. I've been hearing them speak, and I'm completely with you on this. So, in fact, it's Agastya that I was completely intrigued by. So I love the passion that they show towards this, which is so important nowadays. And actually, we were talking about the festivals and the art festivals that are important nowadays to bring out the subject, to put it forth. And we were talking about this, and that's how I got excited about this subject, and I'm over here. So yes, I'm here to learn, and I will contribute. Sure.
No, just to address, we were talking about the role of art in even learning science, technology, engineering, and so if your thoughts on that?
Yes, if we talk from the very basic level, I think when a child just starts school, so it is one language. Art becomes that one language that breaks through all the barriers. So it has no. It makes it easy. It makes it easy for not only children but even adults to receive anything, any message that is being conveyed. So it becomes a powerful tool of communication, which makes it like magic. So even when they are subjects, so it leads to all these subjects and flows in very easily because it has that power to communicate. It has the power to break all the barriers. It has that. It seeks that attention and alertness from people that you cannot get through any other language or any other medium. So, which is why it becomes this umbrella of holistic learning for children. So, yeah.
Okay. So, my follow-up question on that would be, so clearly, I mean, what I hear you saying is it's age-related. I'm thinking of a much older person who says, "Oh my God, I can't draw a picture to save my life." Mm-hmm. So, what in those situations do you see art as a medium to learn anything else?
When you say age-related, I think that's exactly what I mean. That it breaks through. It breaks through all the ages, and it's not just about art. It's not just any one medium of art. Art is that umbrella of all the arts. So it has your visual, your creative, your dance, your music. That's what helps. That's what cuts across. That's why I think the art festivals we have here, and the power it has to attract so many people, because everybody can identify with it. It's a way you can communicate all your messages through, and that's how it helps. So you have the children, you have the adults, you have the older people who are able to identify and understand what is happening here, because it's an easy medium for you to follow. You're not. That's why even if you take science and if you have a little art infused in it, it just becomes easier. It just becomes that much easier to relate to. So it's like a person with science without art. It's a little bit of without heart in a way, So it just brings that extra life into the whole science thing. It's not like science is not possible without art. It very much is, but it's just that it brings out that life, that extra heart into it, that extra, the soul into it. Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I think I just wanted to share on Tuesday, 2 days ago, I spent about 2 hours in the Prince of Wales Museum where there's this exhibition going on called India and the World. And it was such a fantastic, it was done in collaboration with the British Museum. And you know, everything is there. There's art, there's metallurgy, there's textiles, and the entire thing of the way it was presented. It was so beautiful, and including the audio that we kept hearing. And they were talking about the hand axe. So they had these hand axes from many centuries ago, from the Olduvai Gorge and from different parts of the world. And they've done some kind of study where they say that if you map the brain, the areas of the brain that are activated while you're making that hand axe, it's like when you're drawing a picture. You get the same kind of, and that's a very scientific thing, right? And you're getting the same kind of brain waves as you would get when a person is drawing a picture. So maybe one goes, I mean, since it's such a high-powered panel, I would go a little further to ask, all of you are familiar with Agastya's work. And yes, we have science, physics, chemistry, biology, maths, and we have art. And we have some dance, some music. So, Ramji, with your permission, your inputs on how we could go forward in really talking, bringing this kind of holistic learning into the Agastya spaces. Okay. Yes. Can I reverse the order now? Kausik? Not so familiar with Agastya. So what we have are these, science classes, but we also have arts, and we also have a media lab, and we also have, you are fairly familiar with Agastya. Yes. Some. So, I mean, just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, if I may be so impertinent as to say, you have to stop saying, and we have also art.
My apologies. No, but that's the way it is.
Yes,
portion of time spent on science.
Yeah, very right. Yes.
And yes, the children also go.
Yes, and I called it a theocracy earlier advisedly, because that is our new religion. It has been the religion since the early part of the 20th century. And we have fed it more and more, not because it should not be fed, but not to the detriment of other things. And that's been one of the problems. I think if you look at the way in which we function as a country, for instance, I don't think that we train our children or ourselves, that we have not been trained at all, in rhetoric. So we don't know how to conduct public discourse. So we don't know how to argue with passion, but to disagree without being disagreeable. We don't know how to persuade or convince. We still have laws in our country where we say, my sentiments were hurt. And it doesn't bother us that we have laws like that. It doesn't bother us that we can't give in to reveling in the difference of opinion that can exist in a place where all thoughts are welcome. Right? And I think that comes because of a paucity of humanities education in our country. We have laid no ground to enable ourselves to conduct discourse in a public arena. If you don't have a way of communicating ideas, persuading people to believe in your ideas, how are you going to see them grow? Where are you going to get the variety of ideas from? Scientific, artistic, geographic, historical, I don't care what it is. Give it what label you like. If you don't teach that, how do you expect change to happen? Change will always be embedded in the minds and the hands of those who are regarded as powerful by certain metrics in society. Right? And those metrics also get determined by whatever has primacy in education. And that's a bigger problem. So when we are saying that we have art, we have music, we have dance, we have sculpture, and I'd like to hear Kausik talk a little bit more actually about when you say art is no longer seen as painting and sculpture, right? So because there are more things that can be talked about over here. But when I was talking about painting and sculpture, plastic forms and colors and words, literature for instance, or music. For music, for instance, we don't yet have an evolutionary biology explanation for why there is music. It is certainly not required for survival. You can say the complexity of language grew out of an urge to communicate better. That language itself arose from agglomerates of human beings coming together and needing to communicate more rapidly. We had to wait biologically until we could build a column of air where our larynx had to drop down so you could actually articulate complex sounds. But once that was done, language grew really rapidly. Why did language spill into music? What purpose does it serve? We clearly know then that survival is not the only imperative for the fullness of human life. But how many of us are going down that path and saying, let me try and figure this out? Right? We are still saying, can art serve science? Yeah. And I'm saying that question itself may be flawed. That we need to step back and away very slowly without disturbing the status quo and say, can we do it entirely differently? Can we say that there is music here and also physics? As the Kalkeri Sangeet Vidyalaya actually does in northern Karnataka, in a part of rural Dharwad that is so poor that the only criteria that that school has is poverty. Students are fed, clothed, housed and taught. They are taught the state curriculum, but the state curriculum is taught in the afternoons. If a busload of you as students from IIT Bombay and I had gone there, lands up there in the morning at 8:30, from 8 to 11, they're doing music, dance, vocals and instrumental, dance, theatre, you name it. 3 hours every morning of their lives for 10 years, they're going to do the performing arts. And 3 hours every afternoon of their life for 10 years, they're going to do the state board curriculum, which is largely focused on STEM education. Right? Now there's a balance, I would say. So Agastya is a phenomenal place. What I love about Agastya, and I really truly feel inspired to have met Mr. Shahrukh Mistry, who is the architect of the campus there, because every time I have gone to that campus, I have felt here's something they're doing right. They're growing slowly. We've forgotten the pleasure of learning from usage what patterns of building should be like. We've forgotten what it is like to stand in a building and be able to see vistas open in front of you. Right? And all the buildings that are there on the Agastya campus so far continue to have that. You go stand in the library, you turn around behind, and there are the thoughts of thousands of people trapped in printed ink on pieces of paper that give you the joy of living multiple lives simultaneously. You look outward, and there are vistas in which you can reflect upon your own life. I haven't seen a better library in ages. And I'm speaking even of public libraries that I have seen in the United States and in Europe. And I think it's fantastic that Agastya is saying, we're not interested in building on this campus fast. We're going to see what the kids want. We're going to see what we like. And we're going to build it slowly. I love the fact that the Innovation Hub and the Arts Center are stand cheek by jowl. And yet to connect them, you have to run down open corridors. I love the fact that that's how it's designed. And that's where change will come. Not by us articulating in words what has to happen, but in the bodies and the lives of the children who live in that space. Right? And that's already happening, I think, in Agastya. Thank you.
Maybe, Kausik, I ask you a more, since you say you're not very familiar with Agastya, generally in the education we see around us in public schools, private schools, is there a way we can meld the two streams? And do you see a way to do that as...
That's difficult because even in architecture we get students who haven't got in engineering or medicine, and then they come for architecture. So it's I think way we think in IB schools here, only in India they can take all science stream. It is not allowed actually. You have to you can't take all science. But in India it is allowed because you have to become an engineer or a doctor. You can't be anything else. But the thing is that recently lot of people they don't do art courses, but they might be doing architecture or science also and doing art. And so the art field has changed completely because of that. So they might not be able to draw or sculpt. That doesn't matter anymore because the things that are being used, like I have a friend called Anna Best who she organized a wedding party as a art project. Or in one of the performance art, that not the theatre. I mean, the art has a thing called performance art, where the artist use his or her body to express ideas. There, in a camp like that, she took a lot of school kids and played a game with them, and that became a performance. So, constantly the definition of art is changing. That I'll tell why this is happening also, because the artist, after the camera came in, artists lost their job. Okay, they don't have to make portraits or make documents of some events. So art now trying to find its own job description, and because it is trying to find that, art has lost all its boundaries and can flow into anything to become art itself.
Thank you. Dr. Aatre?
Why are we talking about this? Agastya is interested in educating people so that the inherent creativity and innovation which is inherent in all of them will come out. If arts was unnecessary for this, why did that A commit to CP to STEM? STEM was already insufficient. So clearly we have to find a different method of teaching STEM. That is the fundamental issue you have to assume. For each one, I don't think if there is a standard answer already available to us, how teaching would have, we wouldn't have been discussing this topic at all. We still don't know. We are grouping the talk. Sometimes you must look at physical structures or architectural structures and see whether you can use that in science. Let me give you one slightly deviant example. There is a molecule called C60, Buckminster fullerene. When he started talking about, then he had the concept of a geodesic dome. And he said, maybe this is how this molecule will look like. So the geodesic dome part was the first one which came up. And then how to build the geodesic dome came on the Buckminster fullerene's thing. So the interplay is very important. In fact, I have been talking to Ramji several times and Vasu and others. We must bring in different methods of teaching. We still do not know the answer. One of them, like how do you make a student learn a very complex concept by storytelling? We don't know whether really the apple fell on Newton's head. It's a material. But suppose it did, can it be a starting point to enthuse a student saying, how does the gravity work? We also hear James Watt saw a kettle boiling and the movement of that. So steam can move something. So the concept which arises cannot be, should set the trend. They start looking at a group specifically looking at, can we use arts to teach science? Let's not question whether STEM is important, STEAM is important. I think it's immaterial. Can we use, other than the methodology which we are now using to teach science and technology, which has not been very effective, some other method? Could be arts, could be music, as I said, could be dance, could be dramatization, could be sculpture, could be painting. Each one has to explore. When you build a square cycle, it's an art. It has nothing to do with practicality. So I suggest Ram that we start a separate group, and I said, look, let's take one concept. Let's take DNA. Can we use some art to teach DNA? What is that you can do? Why should the Purine and Pyramids link together? So each one has to, we don't know the answer. If we had known the answer, Americans would have written books about it already. As we pointed out, no campus is more alive for methodology of teaching. This summer I was in Michigan where my granddaughter studies in school. She wanted me to go to the STEM section and look at that. What was interesting in the STEM section was, there was no science. They were all playing around, looking at how they will design something. Like one of the models they were given, they were to make a tower using normal materials and glue available at home. And the total weight of the tower was 15 grams. And it has to carry a load of 5 kilograms. So they started playing with which kind of structures to do. And one guy started doodling on the drawing board. He was a very good artist in the sense. And that generated a different kind of a tower which I thought that I think this tower will not work. Because I was looking at the engineering perspective. So there is no set pattern yet on how to use arts and technology. I think this is an area where you have to do fair amount of research, and this cannot be done by engineers alone. That's all I can say.
Just wanted to add that if art has to be introduced, and it's really up to the faculty, it's up to the teachers, organizations like Agastya that is doing such a fantastic job. We need more organizations like that, maybe in that direction. And art may not have to really be something separate. It's almost inclusive in everything that in learning, because really because of art, the medium of art, learning happens automatically and it happens easily. It's not like I'm doing art because I have to learn something else. It just happens as a byproduct. You're learning because you're doing art, and it's fun, it's enjoyable, it makes most other learning really easy, and it's easy to understand what you're doing there. So then art as a tool can be used just as a form of
Information transfer.
Yes, it's an information thing. It's something that happens naturally. It's the learning. For example, a child who's doing art doesn't know that I'm learning art because I have to. Yes, so it's a byproduct. Your learning is all byproduct.
We have some more time, or we should be questions?
Can I make a couple of points?
And questions.
But I found it fascinating, and once again, we are recording it, right? Because we can watch it, we can send it around the world. You know, it's really interesting. I'll tell you now my own personal motivation in Agastya and to continue doing it. I'm not a scientist, not at all, in the strict sense of the term. Maybe there's a little bit of scientific temperament and curiosity and so on, but clearly I'm not a science person. But I remember once when I was in a bank, working for Citibank, and there was a new chairman in '84. And he used a nice metaphor. Now, whether he actually did it or not is a different thing, which caught my imagination. He said, I feel like Michelangelo with the Sistine Chapel. That's how I see my work now, right? Actually, when I got involved with Agastya, with many other people, my sense was, that's how I see Agastya. Not in an egotistical sense, but in the sense probably of how an artist might view the world, I don't know. But this must be a lot of fun, and you're painting on a canvas, right? Metaphorically speaking. Now how it turns out is a different thing. Then the scientists came in and said we need a language to spark curiosity. So hands-on, quote, science is important. And of course there's the arts and so on and so forth. But essentially at the end of the day, the way I see it, personal satisfaction, which may be different from how other people in Agastya see it, is are we painting on a canvas something that's beautiful and that has, at least gives me the sense of aha and ha-ha. That's how I see it. That's why I get excited by the buildings and the spaces, because it's one thing to say, you know, do it this way and do it that way. And another thing where subconsciously somebody gets influenced by the space and behavior changes. So I think this is fascinating, and you know, we shouldn't pigeonhole ourselves. But having said that, there are some realities that, you know, we can't go into right now. But it should be a fun thing for everyone, where there's a sense of expression and hopefully some benefit coming out of all that.
Thank you, Ramji. Are there any questions to the panel? We have about 5 minutes for questions, Ashwani. Yeah. Any questions to... Yeah, please, Shah.
My daughter did art and education at Harvard, and I went for her graduation. And she said, "Dad, this is a complete misnomer. It should be art is education." And what I want to ask all of you is, what is this sense of awe? It's there in science, it's there in art, I mean, in the way we kind of see everything around us. So does awe start to play a very important role in an ultimate educational program?
May I say something? You know, about 3 or 4 months back, I was called into some school. They think I'm a very great scientist, so they came and said, they wanted me to talk about theory of relativity, which I hardly understand. But then one student said, "Sir, this is all mumbo jumbo, higher tensors, these areas, and other these are no use equations and so on. What is the use of it?" he asked. Fortunately, I knew what is the use of relativity. I showed him he was carrying a cell phone. And I told him there is what's called a GPS in the cell phone. Global positioning system. Global positioning system works on the principle of what relativity predicts as time dilation. There is a 38 millisecond delay because of the 20,000 kilometers at which the constellation of things goes on, the 14,000 kilometers per hour thing, that produces a time dilation of 38 milliseconds, which allow you to estimate thinking. He said, that I will learn. So why I'm giving you the example is, it depends on how you present it to them. I think that is why for each scientific discovery, we have to, Dale Carnegie has written a book of little known facts of well known figures. Somebody asked him, how do you spell Einstein's theory of relativity? A joke he writes, when you sit on a hot stove for an hour, for a minute you think it for an hour. When you sit with a sweet girl for an hour, you think it is for a minute. So that is how you teach science, if you really want to do things. So each concept, you have to develop some method of teaching. That comes from, if you want to call arts, I don't care. If you want to call liberal arts, I don't care. If you want to call something else, it's a method of communication. Science doesn't teach you communication. Science teaches you facts. Facts and truths. How do you communicate those facts and truth to your uncluttered mind yet? If you achieve that, I don't care whether you're a dancer, you're an artist or a sculptor, that is where you put it across. That's my opinion.
Are there any other questions? Yeah, please, Puneet.
Hi. I want to add something, and then I need all of your input to that. What I feel, we all talk about science and arts and everything, and I think we can borrow something from the fields of art in the science. Because, for example, I go to sessions where they talk about film appreciation, and they show you a film, and then for hours people will appreciate what was the kind of lighting, what was the script, how the acting was, and things like that. And I am wondering why I never had a machine appreciation session. Can't we do that? And can't that happen? But I think that is like the same thing. And then perhaps I will learn a lot more and I will appreciate what's happening and why things are made. And I think perhaps that we can borrow and bring into science education. That's my little input, and I want, and you guys can do it. I am not a scientist, so I can't appreciate, but I can always be there and understand how it's. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
to also answer a little bit to what you had asked. I think awe is a fabulous word, but I request us to shift to wonder. The problem with awe is that very often it becomes congruent with reverence. And the problem with reverence is that it can't be questioned. But you're very right. I think the sense of wonder that we carry into any enterprise, into any endeavor, is what informs the joy that it brings us. We don't have to accomplish anything, right? It's just a question of inquiry, of curiosity. When I was talking about arts being the means of sort of cognitive and evaluative skill development, science is the means of increasing understanding. But you can't really separate these two things and speak of them as distinct. Philosophy is a way of communicating both, right? And we've given them names, I think, only in order to understand the modes. But in everything that we do, all of it comes together. There is no way that you could argue with Feynman, and he is on record saying this, that when he looks at a sunset, the fact that he knows exactly how the light is sort of being bent by gravity to give him this bleeding sky into the ocean takes away from the poetry of it. You could not convince him of that. It was as poetic as it was scientific to his mind, right? And it was a merger of understanding that came from both what we call the scientific temper and the possibility of experiencing it artistically. And again, the only reason that it needs that kind of explanation is because I'm trying to translate his experience, as he spoke of it, into words. Otherwise, intellectually and bodily, we express and understand these things all the time. Kurt Vonnegut spoke of this. He says all these are forms of human playfulness. And we've given them different names and called them disciplines. We've called the ability to jump very high as somebody who gets an Olympic medal in high jump. But every child who tries to jump very high is responding to that same urge of seeing how high the body can go, right? And we've stopped looking at that fundamental principle. What is the human urge to reach out and express itself in all of these various ways? And I understand that there are challenges, that especially in structured society, it's not easy to break away from all structure. Oh God, at IIT, which is a wonderful campus, we know हाथी को turn करने में बड़ा वक्त लगता है. So many things are already in place that you can have a fantastic new idea, but it's going to need a large turning radius. But until we start pushing it a little bit in that direction, there is no way that that turn is going to happen at all. And that's where we have to be headed. We really have to stop speaking of arts and sciences as separate. We have to change that language. We have to create a new vocabulary that allows us to speak of education, of the joy of the fullness of any endeavor, right? And that's when we'll find modes where, I remember Mr. Ajit Basu speaking about integrated learning, speaking of concepts like flying was the thing that you had talked about when we met once, and how you can bring biology, literature, physics, all kinds of things to bear on an understanding of flight. Right? I have a really dear friend, Sanjay Sane, who's a professor at NCBS, National Center for Biological Sciences. His background is in astrophysics, and his PhD in integrated biology came on the study of the flight patterns of flies, right? Insect flight. Everything that we know about planes, for instance, comes from bodies that have mass, from bird flight. We don't really know much about insect flight at all, where mass is so little. How do we begin to understand that? What is it? What is the urge that drives us to look at that? Right? We've got to come down to the fundamentals of human curiosity and stop trying to give it names. There's this gorgeous song by Gulzar in a film called Khamoshi, which speaks of this in terms of love, where he says, "Humne dekhi hai un aankhon ki mehkti khushboo." You listen to that first line and you think, it's meaningless. आंखों की महकती खुशबू क्या होती है? आंखें तो देखती हैं, खुशबू तो नाक से पता चलती है ना. हमने देखी है उन आंखों की महकती खुशबू, हाथ से छूकर इसे रिश्तों का इल्जाम न दो.
call it discipline with discipline.
हाँ, सिर्फ एहसास है ये, रूह से महसूस करो, प्यार को प्यार ही रहने दो, कोई नाम न दो. And that's what we need to do with knowledge in India. Thank you.
But just before that, I'd like to respond a small example from Agastya Puneet of appreciation. You know, everywhere in Agastya, in our science centers, our science labs, you'll see the model of the human torso. And you know, the packed inside with all the organs and the systems and everything. So when the instructors pick it up, some of them get into this thing of, this is the heart, this is the stomach. So, you know, we were talking about this. We said, first thing, you ask children to just appreciate how much is packed into that space. Right? I mean, that's the first thing you need to do. How beautifully it all fits in. How beautifully all these systems work together. And somewhere in the anxiety to, you know, I have to tell them about all these, you know, so many organs, so many systems and all that, they jump into that thing. And then it becomes like a memory exercise and things like that. So, you know, this is what, at least certainly in our trainings, we try to do. Step back. What is this human body that is so fantastic? So, this is just a small example from Agastya. I think, Mukesh, that would be the last question. And
it's more like a comment. So I was trying to, it's wonderful to hear various sides of it. So there were pedagogical concerns which Dr. Aatre was raising. And then there was breaking this discipline that Alka was raising. And then there was some artistic concerns. So I've been a student of education. So I understand that there is a different forms of understanding. And each forms of understanding, like philosophy, will have its own internal, you know, some arrangement of what is called knowledge, valid knowledge. The same is for science, more of empirical evidences. Aesthetics is a different way of looking at it. But then if I look at what we do at Agastya and how it begins. So we are trying to do something like Jigyasa at Ghoda. And we don't have a lot of experience, and none of our team could make a visit to Jigyasa we're doing in Hubli. So we thought, okay, let's start working with the children where we are. And since in Ghoda, kind of we are, Gurgaon districts, we are covering maybe around 2/3 of the schools. So we thought, okay, let's do something. So we got initial from 500 synopsis. And then we started evaluating it. So we said, okay, children, when they started writing, thinking, they are not thinking what is science, what is arts, whatever comes to them, they're working on it. They're working on it. And then there is someone who was with us from IIT Banaras. He goes, no, this is something which is cannot be of a level of Jigyasa. Then when internally we started thinking and we started debating, then we figured, okay, let's figure out what could be really looked at a science thing which is innovative at their level, and then let us look at what has been their arts in it. So my take is that appreciating children's work and allowing it to come from whatever they come is a good way to start. But certainly, the structure of India education system will tell them, look, this is science, and this is it. So maybe as a step Agastya can take, why don't we create an aha with children when they enter us by exposing, okay, this is a world where knowledge does not seem to be in compartments.
That's great.
Thanks.
That's great. And that would answer Puneet's question a little bit also about machine. Of course, it should be there. Machine appreciation, absolutely, it should be there.
So I think, like one of those TV anchors, I do not want to say we are out of time. It was fantastic listening to all of you. And I think we've opened up a lot of questions that Agastya would like to debate on and see, if we can redirect our programs in more meaningful ways. Thank you very, very much. And
thank you.